Hi, my name is Jabin and you're watching rptv. In this video, Dr. Aditi Mehta, an assistant professor for the Urban Studies program at the University of Toronto, held a presentation to discuss an often overlooked element of Regent Park's culture, the Muslim community. She tells her story of how she collaborated with communities and organizations in a project to explore, amplify, and empower the Muslim identity of the Regent Park community through fighting against harmful stereotypes, challenging stigmas, and taking control of the narrative. Let's see what she has to discuss.
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming and for, to Soraya for inviting me here today. So I am going to talk about a project that I've been working on in Regent Park for the past 5 years. And it's actually about a class that I teach here and how that class has turned into a research project. And it's super exciting to see some of the alums of the class. And what's a little bit funny about this talk, I've given versions of it before in other places, but they're places outside of Regent Park, actually not even in Canada. So I spend a lot of time explaining Regent Park and the culture and the context, but most of you already know that. So I'll go quickly through that, and feel free to chime in because you all probably know more about what I'm talking about in some aspects than I do. So I hope this will be a bit interactive. So before I fully get started, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm Aditi Mehta. I'm a professor at the Urban Studies program here at University of Toronto. And before I became an academic, I actually worked for an affordable housing developer in the United States. So I'm American. And that developer, the clients were usually cities, or in the US we call it public housing, so public housing authorities. And we were given large portfolios of public or social housing to redevelop and turn into mixed income communities. So not very different from what's happening here in Regent Park. And through that job, I became really critical of this type of housing policy, and I found my way back to graduate school. And in graduate school, I thought that I would be focusing on housing policy and affordable housing, but I sort of pivoted, and I ended up focusing more on media, community media, news infrastructure, communication infrastructure. And the reason that happened is because I learned, or I saw, that the stories that we see in the media are actually what's forming public consciousness and affecting public policy and the plans that people create. And in the field of urban planning, we look at all sorts of infrastructures all the time. We look at housing infrastructure, transit infrastructure, green infrastructure, but we don't really look at news infrastructures, communication infrastructures, or media infrastructures, which is so important because it's how people share knowledge, learn about their neighborhoods, make sense of their urban environments in the first place. So that actually became my focus during my research. And I researched that in the context of disasters and disaster planning. And then I finished my PhD and I moved here to Toronto, and I had never even been to Toronto when I took this job. And because of my prior work with media organizations and understanding the role of media, I knew that I wanted to work with a community media organization. So the former director, we have the director of the Urban Studies program here, David Roberts, but the former director at that time, she told me about this organization called Focus Media Arts. And I wasn't exactly sure how I wanted to work with them. I just wanted to learn more, and I knew that community media organizations were really important because they tell the stories of neighborhoods and place. So before I contacted this organization, and we have Dower here who works for the organization, before I contacted them, I did all this research. I said, okay, I need to really understand what this organization is about. I need to understand the neighborhood. And at the time, I didn't realize how important and almost trendy Regent Park was in the city of Toronto. And it was really easy to find information about Regent Park because I moved here in 2018, so the redevelopment project was well underway, and there was tons in the media about Regent Park. And the media was talking about how amazing this redevelopment project was. And then there was tons of academic literature about Regent Park as well. And the academic literature, because academics are really good at critiquing, were critiquing this redevelopment project. So I was reading up and getting a sense of this place and space in order to be prepared for this meeting with Focus Media Arts. And because of my prior experiences, I had an idea in my head of what Regent Park would be like, because I had worked on the redevelopment of social housing neighborhoods in the US, and those neighborhoods were primarily African American, and they had primarily sort of high-rise structures or big massive like towers. So in my imagination, that's what I thought Regent Park would be like. And then I arrived here to meet with Focus, and the thing that struck me right away was the Muslim identity of the neighborhood. And in all of the media representations I had read about Regent Park, and in all of the academic literature, except for I think one article, nobody was talking about the Muslim identity of the neighborhood. So I was really, really struck by that. And so then I met with Focus Media Arts. I shared that observation. And I'll tell you what happened next. But before I tell you what happened next, let me tell you a little bit about Focus Media Arts. So it's a nonprofit here in Regent Park. I'm sure many of you had heard of them. And they were founded in the 90s because a group of residents were coming together and talking about the fact that when they applied for jobs, people were not giving them jobs because they would see that their address was Regent Park. And the reason for this was because in the 90s, there was a lot of negative portrayal of Regent Park because of a lot of the gun violence that was happening here. And so these residents came together and said, we need to destigmatize our neighborhood, and we need to educate reporters about other aspects of Regent Park. And so this organization formed, these residents came together, and the idea was to take control of the neighborhood's narrative and to provide media literacy, media training, media production for residents who could then become community journalists and tell the stories they wanted to about Regent Park, and also to actually intervene and educate journalists. So if a story came out in the Toronto Star, for example, that was really offensive or negative about Regent Park, then a resident would sort of have the know-how on how to educate the reporter about their bad reporting. And actually, Focus Media Arts coined this term that they called neighborhoodism. And neighborhoodism is basically when your neighborhood is stigmatized in mainstream media. So what they did is they started partnering with other neighborhoods, like Parkdale, for example, or St. Jamestown's very close, and they formed what they called the Communities Against Neighborhood Coalition, they co-founded the Communities Against Neighborhoodism Coalition. And basically, this was their mission, to help train residents to take control of their narrative and to intervene in mainstream media and to destigmatize their neighborhoods. And now, more recently, one of the missions of Focus Media Arts is to chronicle the redevelopment and make sure that there's a hyper-local resident perspective of what's happening. So when I first met with Adonis Huggins, who's the executive director of Focus Media Arts, I shared my observation with him about how I was so shocked that in all of my research about the neighborhood, none of it mentioned the Muslim identity of the neighborhood, which is such an important aspect to consider for redevelopment. And so Adonis agreed with me, and then he said, you know, we have a youth program here. It's called the Diva Girls. And the Diva Girls are a group of young women from the ages of 12 to 17. And they come here twice a week, and they sort of explore their identity using media in Regent Park. So is that something that's interesting to you? Maybe you could do something to work with the Diva Girls. So I got really excited, and I said, yeah, let's do something. And so what we ended up doing is we decided to create a joint class. And this class was half U of T students and then half women from the Diva Girls program. And so it would be about somewhere between 7 to 12 U of T students and 7 to 12 Diva Girls. And every week we would meet here in Daniel Spectrum. Well, actually, the first iteration of the course, there was no Daniel Spectrum. So we met in a basement. Now I'm forgetting the street name, but down that street. We met Regent Street. We met in a basement in a building in Regent Street. And we would learn about the neighborhood together. And the idea is to expand knowledge production. So what do I mean by that? So for educators, broadening knowledge production means developing students' capacity to effectively analyze the social processes that contribute to urban inequality. And then for scholars, broadening knowledge production means expanding the starting places from which knowledge about urban affairs is produced so that scholarship more accurately represents the diversity of urban experiences. And so for the first 6 weeks of the class, I would lecture about the history of the neighborhood, and these young women, they've spent their whole lives in the neighborhood, so they would sort of comment on these lectures or give their lived experience or their interpretation of what was going on. And we were, in this way, creating new knowledge about what all this information out there about Regent Park was. And then in the second 6 weeks of the class, what happens is that students collaborate with the young women, the residents, in small groups, and they come up with a research question about anything that's of interest in the neighborhood, and they spend the next 6 weeks researching that question. But instead of writing a more typical research paper or report, they have to actually create a media project. And the idea is that media is accessible to all. We're always interacting with media and creating it in informal ways on our iPhones, on social media. And so this was sort of a connection tool around everyone. So we've had 4 iterations of the class. The first 2 were with the Diva Girls, and then we went on hiatus because of the pandemic. And then the second 2 iterations, that program got canceled, and we changed the structure, and we worked with adult residents. So like Fatou was part of the class, and Mishiga was part of the class. So very quickly, I'll share some of the themes. Every year we have a different theme. In 2019, the theme was gentrification and revitalization. In 2020, it was the role of faith in the neighborhood. And this year's theme came out of some of the highlights of the project or the 2020 theme came out of highlights from the projects in the 2019 theme. And then when we transitioned to working with adults and youth no longer, in 2022 and 2024, the themes were the history of immigration in the neighborhood and civic engagement. So I really look to focus media arts to help guide the themes based on what's happening at that moment in the neighborhood or what they think would be interesting. So for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to focus on the 2019 and 2020 iterations of the course, but just wanted to also tell you about these 2. Okay, so when I started the class in 2019, to get everyone talking and to get to know one another, I asked every participant in the course to bring their favorite piece of media or a piece of media that was meaningful to them. And most people, I would say, by people I mean the young women, most of the residents in the class, all brought something to do with Mustafa the poet. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with Mustafa. How many of you? I'm seeing everyone nod yes. Okay, so most of these young women brought either a clip of a YouTube video or just one of his songs. And at that time, because I was new here, I didn't know who Mustafa the poet was. And then I learned about him through all these young women. And then I realized what is so important about this is Mustafa was the only person who was creating media and representing the immigrant and Muslim identity of Regent Park. So none of the academic literature was, none of the mainstream media was. Focus was in some of their programming, but nobody else was. So I was really struck and excited to learn about him. A lot of his music videos, as you know, show imagery from the neighborhood. They actually take place in the neighborhood. His songs are about what's happening here, about grief and loss in the neighborhood. So since that first iteration of the course, I've actually incorporated Mustafa into the syllabus. And remember, a lot of the U of T students that take the course, some of them are not from Toronto, some of them are even international. And so the learning experience for them is a big one because they're coming into a new neighborhood that they have no context of. And it's the media that Mustafa is creating that actually sort of helps orient everyone. So I thought I would share that. So from this class, I developed these research questions. What can we learn about cities from youth media productions more broadly? And then specifically, what did Black and Muslim youth media from Regent Park uncover about their neighborhood's redevelopment that academic scholarship missed? And so the way I answered these questions was that I observed my class. So I engaged in ethnographic participant observation. So ethnography or ethnographic participant observation is when you embed yourself in an environment and you're taking detailed notes about everything that's happening and you're forming close relationships and understanding different people's perspectives. So by teaching the course, I was able to observe my own course. I had students submit weekly student response papers. So the U of T students were required to do this, and then it was optional for the youth, and actually the youth did not do it, but that's okay. And then I also had final student reflection papers, and then I ran separate focus groups with the U of T students and also with the young women to better understand how they were experiencing the class, what they were learning, what new knowledge they felt like they were producing through the experience. And really the way I answered these questions is through the projects that everyone created together. So before I get into the projects, I'll very, very briefly go through some context about the neighborhood. But as I said, you all probably know this. So chime in if you want to add more. I'm just giving this so we're all on the same page. But as you know, Regent Park was Canada's first social housing neighborhood that was built in 1949. And this family is called the Blewitts, and they're sort of the poster child family that was moving into this social housing. And many of the people that were living in the social housing or moving into the social housing were European immigrants from Ireland and Italy and Eastern Europe. And the city sort of saw these people as the deserving working poor that needed to live in fresh, clean housing because previously Regent Park was called Cabbage Town, and it was a lot of overcrowded immigrant tenements. And so this is sort of the first iteration of Regent Park. And then what happens is we see a transformation of the neighborhood. So about a decade later, by the 1960s, over 150,000 people immigrated to Canada from the Caribbean. And in 1960, Regent Park South was revitalized housing, and it was mostly for some of these new immigrants coming from the Caribbean. So we see that trend from the 60s to the 90s. And then from the 1990s onward, we see another shift. And it was in 1990 that Toronto Community Housing housed their first Bangladeshi family. And through that tenant, they sort of got connected to more Bangladeshi families. And we see the population shift to Asian, South Asian, North African, and another transformation. So really, we watch the culture of Regent Park go from white to Black, Muslim, and immigrant. And this graph here actually shows this trend. But what's interesting is the first bar is 2001, and this is percent Muslim population in Toronto versus Regent Park. And while the percent Muslim population decreased from 2001 to 2021 in Regent Park, the actual numbers actually increased by 12%. And so this, because 2001 is before the redevelopment and 2021 is sort of way after, during. So I think this proportion is representing all of the newcomers that have come and sort of diluted that Muslim percentage. But Regent Park's Muslim population was 2,680 in 2001, and then over the next 2 decades, it increased by 12.3%, reaching 3,010 in 2021. And what happens is now, by the 1970s, descriptions of Regent Park in the Toronto Star they shifted radically. So first, in 1949 and the 50s, when the social housing was built, the newspaper was lauding it as this amazing development. They were calling the neighborhood utopia or heaven. But then by the 1970s, the reporting changed to call it a colossal flop or a hopeless slum. And as I mentioned earlier, this is what sort of led to the stigmatization of the neighborhood and the founding of Focus Media Arts. And so by 1990s, the neighborhood or the project of social housing here had come to be seen as a failure and stigmatized as poor, crime-ridden, and violent neighborhood with large numbers of visible minorities and immigrants. And a lot of this is because the housing wasn't being maintained or managed properly. There weren't enough social services in the area. But of course, when you tell stories like this, then different people attribute things to the people who live in the neighborhood. So this then led to Regent Park today, which you all are very, very familiar with, and it is this huge redevelopment project that has been occurring since 2005, which Daniels Corporation was first in charge of, phases 1, 2, and 3, and now we're in the middle of, or starting phases 4 and 5, in North Regent Park, and that is being run by Tridel Corporation. And the goal of this really is to, as you all know, densify the neighborhood, increase the number of affordable units. So there was a commitment to do a 1-to-1 replacement. But now, because of a zoning reapproval, the neighborhood is becoming even more dense and there'll be more affordable housing. And then to densify the neighborhood with market rate housing, which is then paying for the subsidized housing and also yet again changing the cultures of the neighborhood. And so then what happens after the project is launched? We then get really positive media again. So the first article is from the Toronto Star talking about how this revitalization is a game changer. And the second is international media. The New York Times is actually profiling Regent Park. And one thing I'll say is that in the United States, all of the big mixed income housing development projects that I've worked on or that are studied or I know really well, none of them densify the neighborhood. They all de-densify the neighborhood, and actually only half of the affordable units come back. And this is a big policy dilemma and question about, well, why are we addressing affordable housing in this way? So the fact that here in Canada, the way that this was approached is we need to make the neighborhood more dense and do a 1-to-1 replacement actually is really fantastic. Okay, so then from there, I'm going to talk about the different sort of interventions our class is making. So I see our class as a pedagogical intervention because very rarely do you see courses where students in the university are learning alongside residents of a place that they're studying. So first, it's a pedagogical intervention. It's also a practice intervention, maybe the way that urban planners or policy officials or people that actually do city building. It's a new way of thinking about the process of doing that. And then it's also an intervention into urban theory and urban literature. So I think our class engages with two sorts of bodies of literature. And the very first one is all of the existing research about Regent Park. And because this is Canada's first social housing neighborhood being transformed into Canada's first big mixed income development. There's a lot of research and scholarship about this neighborhood. I think there's something like 30 peer-reviewed published articles about Regent Park. And so this is just a quick summary of what some of those articles are saying. And academics are really good at critiquing. So unlike the mainstream media of today, these articles are very critical of what's happening here. So for example, one article talks about the redevelopment plan as recolonization of the neighborhood, where it's sort of just a state-sponsored project with like a fake type of community engagement. Another article is talking about how youth felt a lack of representation in the new Regent Park. And mind you, a lot of these researchers sort of come and use these standard social science protocols to do their research. So they'll do interviews or surveys and then they leave. Other scholars talk about the deep residential attachment that people here have, the strong bonds and community networks they have, and how even though all of this affordable housing, even though it's being retained because it takes time to get relocated and people move out and newcomers are coming, those social ties and sense of community are breaking apart. And then lastly, a lot of articles also talk about how cross-class interactions were not occurring. So there's all these new residents coming, but they're not necessarily interacting with the old residents. But as I said earlier, none of these articles are talking about the Black Muslim immigrant identity of the neighborhood. And so that's one of the purposes of our class, to elevate that perspective and point of view. And then the second body of literature is about the role of religion in planning, which is really understudied. And urban planning, as a professional practice, it's largely indifferent to religion. It's a secular practice, and religion is thought to be something private and individual and something that you experience on your own, whereas urban planning is thought to be this rational practice for the good of the public that doesn't really engage on issues of faith and spirituality. It's rather thinking about how do we create or city build for the public good. And obviously religion will still come up in the way we're designing or building our cities. For example, in the Greater Toronto Area, there's so many examples of developers or faith groups trying to build mosques. And then those mosques get rejected because urban planners use bylaws or conversations around like zoning or rules to say, oh, a mosque wouldn't fit here because of parking guidelines or this. But we don't know if that's actually hidden in some sort of racism or xenophobia. So that's the other issue, that discussions about race and faith, they often get subsumed in discourse about racial ethnic diversity and xenophobia. So urban planners are not specifically talking about religion and faith. So it's really interesting because this whole neighborhood, as we saw, has such a large and important Muslim population, but that hasn't been at the forefront in discussions on how do we redevelop and how do we design the neighborhood for that population. So in the class, we had all of these young Muslim women with very important and clear perspectives about their spirituality, and it came out in the class project. So I will share and summarize some of the projects with you and then actually show you a video. So in the 2019 iteration of the course, we were asking, who is this revitalization really for? And so the group of students, they created a zine, which is sort of like an informal, mass-produced magazine that was documenting art and memory of the rapidly changing neighborhood. And one of the residents wrote a really beautiful essay about the difference in door colors, how there's blue doors and brown doors that distinguish the market rate and affordable housing units, and how, in a way, the colors of the doors she also felt were linked to her identity as a Muslim woman. Another project that students created was this satirical infomercial that exposes how inaccessible the neighborhood's new public amenities were to longtime social housing residents. And so this one really focused on the aquatic center. And as I'm sure all of you know, that at first there was no programming that was specific to Muslim women in the aquatic center. And then also the aquatic center is open to the larger city. So people were just signing up and kind of taking spaces away from Regent Park residents. And so this satirical documentary, students were asking, well, who is this public space really for? Another project that students created was an interactive timeline that embedded the life story of one young Muslim woman from Regent Park into the history of the redevelopment. And so it was so interesting about working with these young women is because they were between the ages of 12 to 17, their whole lives, the neighborhood had been under redevelopment. They had always lived in like a neighborhood in flux. And so they embedded her life story into the history of the redevelopment alongside the history of media about the neighborhood. So the history of academic articles coming out, or the history of documentaries coming out, or community media. And what this interactive timeline allows you to see then is different gaps of knowledge when you layer all these types of knowledge into a timeline. And then in 2020, because of all these sort of observations or insights about faith, we focused the class on the role of faith in the neighborhood. So a group of students created a video montage of what it feels like to be a young Muslim woman in Regent Park. And then they also created story maps and guidebooks about the various religious institutions in the neighborhood, the space they share, the histories of those institutions. So these are just a few select projects. I'm really quickly also going to talk about the 2024 projects because we have some members of the class here. So these projects were not with youth, they were with adults. But for example, Roya, who is in the class, her team created a community development board game that allows players to learn about the history of the neighborhood, but also learn about community development and imagine futures for the neighborhood. And then Mishika's team created a website about green spaces in the neighborhood, and they make the argument that it's not just people that were displaced through the redevelopment, but also green spaces that were displaced. Another team created a documentary about the social development plan, which I know you're all aware about. And Fatom's team actually created a really beautiful cookbook. And the cookbook features recipes from residents. Marianne is actually in the cookbook, as well as their immigrant stories, and sort of uses the food and culture of Regent Park as almost like a resistance to the redevelopment and the change. So what I'll do now is I'll actually show you this video that I just referenced from the 2020 iteration of the class. And this is a really powerful video. It was created by two young Muslim women who grew up in Regent Park, and then 3 University of Toronto students. And this video was actually created during the pandemic. So the class started, we were all in person, and then when there was only 4 sessions left, the world shut down. And so this group of people had to figure out, well, what are we going to create? What is it that we're going to do now that we can't meet? And their original idea was they wanted to survey Muslim women in the neighborhood about their experiences with Islamophobia in the neighborhood, but they weren't able to do that. So then the 2 young women who had that idea said, you know what, we're just going to make a video montage about what we feel like being Muslim in Regent Park. So I'll share their video with you, and then I will also read an excerpt from their essay.
here. Hi. No, ma'am. So state your name and the initial, like the first letter of your last name and your age. Miriam A. What age? I'm turning 17. Hi, my name is Aditi Mehta and I'm 16. So I have questions for you.
The Greater Toronto Area, home to more Muslims than any other place on the continent.
I think some people, I don't know, a lot of people who are educated about our religion would know that it's very like peaceful.
How do you feel that your religion is portrayed to other people?
Depends. Some people look at it like and they don't like it, and some people see all this, it's actually good. Like after they like learn about it more, they'll be like, oh, okay, it's actually good. But like a lot of like people like kind of think, oh, like Islam, it's not that good, you know.
90% of young Muslims report a strong sense of belonging in Canada.
In general, like how does it feel being in Regent Park?
I feel safe. I feel like amongst a lot of people who are just like really practicing their faith. Like, you know, there's a lot of people who wear hijab, there's a lot of people who go to the mosque. So, yeah, I feel safe and I feel like I'm where I should be. It's good because we have like access to like the mosque and like it's nearby and stuff, so it's good.
It's good because there's so much of like a lot of Muslims in our community, and so it's like everyone like follows the same. Like, a lot of people in our community is like Muslim, so like it's like you don't feel shy coming out or like whatever because there's so much people around you that are the same thing, and they like if you need help, they'll help you and stuff like that.
And how does it feel outside of Regent Park?
Compared to like going out of the community, there's so many people that just stare at you as if you're some type of sculpture or something.
So like for example, like if I went to an area I've never been before. Let's just say that like I'm new to this area, or like I'm not usually at that area whenever I be there. I'll feel like it's like a foreign place. Like I just didn't feel like I don't know what I should be ready for. I don't know what I should expect from how people see me. Like here in Regent Park, I know okay, people have been seen. There's more there. A lot of Muslim people are here, and a lot of people see Muslim people are around here.
Mariam Nosser never expected to be cast as an outsider. After all, she was born and raised in Toronto, a proud Canadian and a proud Muslim.
And have you come across those reactions personally?
Yeah, a lot of people, like whenever I'm in like E-Text, there's like a lot of people when I watch me by, they start like cursing us, cursing our religion.
People will be saying stuff under their breath, you know, like they think I can't hear it, but obviously they say it for me to hear it. And it's just like you don't even know me, like why are you even judging me by just from what you see?
Why would Canadians, contrary to our own values, embrace a practice at that time that is not transparent, that is not open, and frankly is rooted in a culture that is anti-women?
His language around, you know, we'll find them in the mosques or in their homes, those types of things really are creating fear, I think, or he's trying really hard to create fear, and I think it's definitely something that, as a Muslim, would be of concern, because we are creating, you know, sort of the same type of fear that we had post 9/11.
I don't understand their religion, so all I know is about terrorism, and it's connected to Muslim and Hamas.
She said you should go home, you're not Canadian.
A new survey finds 48% of young Muslims with a strong religious identity report they faced discrimination. Most of them are women.
We're just here to really give you guys a voice.
The organizers say aside from celebration, events like these offer an important opportunity to dispel myths about a religion often misunderstood.
You see some cruel people acting out in the name of Islam, and really we want to tell people that these people do not represent us.
It's about Muslim females not having to give up their identity or feeling like they have to sacrifice some portion of their identity.
To be honest, a lot of people like go like, oh, Islam is such a terrorist religion, this, that. But like my religion is so peaceful, you know, very peaceful.
It's about your ability to keep going on and not giving up.
So that's one of the projects. And then very quick excerpt from the essay about the project. Regent Park provides community public space for these young women to freely practice and express their religious identities without hesitation or fear. But there is fear with the redevelopment. Regent Park is no longer a safe space for these women. So that is sort of what the class is trying to do, sort of elevate these other ideas, perspective, voices that mainstream media and published research is not. And then, as I said earlier, I see the class as an intervention into teaching pedagogy, into urban theory, and also into practice. So what are some pedagogical findings of the class? So first, I see that the co-production of media allows the class openly to talk about religion and faith and how it needs to be better incorporated into planning processes. So talking about race and faith, these are difficult things to talk about. And the class is so diverse. You have people, the U of T side, they're from all over. But the fact that we're using media to talk about it or to create space for it made those conversations easier. And then also this informal amateur aspect of media production, it disrupted class relations. It sort of creates an equal playing field where everybody can share the knowledge that they have, and it allowed that knowledge sharing to occur. And then something else that's really interesting is a lot of the projects, not so much this year, but in the years with working with the youth, is the power of comedy and satire. And so using comedy and satire allowed students to really reimagine the neighborhood and juxtapose sort of official kind of knowledge about the neighborhood or official plans for the neighborhood with their own ideas and reveal kind of the gap between them. So comedy, satire, these are really powerful tools. And then lastly, the class sort of shows a new perspective on the power of hyperlocal media and spaces like focus media art, which are building relationships and the larger public consciousness about Regent Park. And then in terms of planning practice or city builders who actually do this, so first and foremost, I think that urban planners, they need to pay close attention to media, news, and communication cultures and infrastructures to understand a place. So I think a lot of the planners that developed this plan or even created the phasing of the plan, I don't think they did a deep dive into the archives of focus or really did a deep dive to understand, well, how are people in Regent Park communicating with each other and sharing knowledge? So one of the things I've heard a lot is that the fact that phases 4 and 5 are in the north, it's like reinforcing this historical tension between the north and the south. So why wasn't it phased the other way? I mean, I'm sure a planner would give you a very technical reason why, but sort of doing a deep dive and paying attention to media would sort of help you consider these types of things. And then I just wonder, is it possible to use this class pedagogy through different engagement design and development processes? So something that I hear a lot from students in the class is usually when you're in a class, you're given like a very specific kind of assignment. Like you have to write a research paper, you have to write a report. But this class, your assignment is very open-ended. You can create anything you want as long as you're co-creating it with residents. And I think at first everybody finds that daunting, but then it pushes them to think really creatively and create things they wouldn't have otherwise. And so I think that's sort of the same for city builders. Usually planners with the city or a firm, they have a very specific task at hand and then they have to figure out how to do the task. But is there a way that they can just create and then co-create with people in the places that they're working with and actually use whatever comes out of that in their practice? And then this is a question that I'm still working on, and I'm studying, but how can planners directly engage with the role that faith and religion play in specific neighborhoods? and the city. And that brings me sort of to the next steps with this course. So something that I learned about teaching this course over the last few years is about the basement mosques in Regent Park. And I'm sure you all know about them. But I was told that there were 6 basement mosques in the social housing buildings at one point. They were sort of these ad hoc informal mosques that residents created. And now only 2 remain, the one at 260 Sumac and 463 Gerrard Street. But these 2 are going to disappear very soon as new housing is being built. And the design, the urban design guidelines for phases 4 and 5, they talk about community hubs, creating community hubs for an interfaith center, but they don't actually specifically talk about these basement mosques or create space for these basement mosques. And part of that is because of bylaws and rules. You can't do that, and so it has to be more open, but also something here is getting missed or lost because these basement mosques provide really important needs, services, community for residents. So I'm starting a research project this summer to better understand resident perspectives about the basement mosques and understand how they've been used, how they formed, what they mean to residents, to hopefully help inform what happens in what the urban design guidelines are called community hubs. So if you are someone who actually goes to these basement mosques or has a relationship with anyone that does, we would love to interview you or hear from you. So there's a QR code here. You can use the QR code and then just sign up and we'll contact you. But also Mishka and Roya are here and they're working on the project and they have paper sort of sign up sheets and you can sign up there and then we'll contact you for an interview and we would love to hear from you.
I'll give you a little bit of insight on that.
Yes, please.
So I'm a co-chair of Regent Park Islamic Resource Center. This is the umbrella for the old basement. So right now in 246, last 2 weeks ago, they give them a temporary space. So which is, they have a schedule, they pay 5 times. So that's the umbrella for the older basement.
Okay.
It's a 246.
But it's a temporary space.
Totally.
Yeah.
So until phase 4 and 5.
But 260 and 463 are still
260
operating.
is gone.
It's gone. Everything is gone.
Oh, everything's gone now.
Everything's gone.
Oh, okay. It's all gone now. Okay.
Everything's gone.
Because we just went a couple of months ago, but it's gone now. Okay. They move fast. Okay.
I think 463 is still.
So all of them, they are here on this place in 246. So they have a schedule. All of them making a turn to open 246.
Okay.
So the good people pray on 246.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to learn from all of you about this more.
Sure, yeah.
And then I'll just end here. Please check out our course site. I mentioned some of the projects, but if you go to this website, you can actually see them, interact with them, learn about them. And yeah, that brings me to the end of the talk. So thank you very much.
This is good. So I've been a part of Revitalization 5. I have personal experience. Usually when I go to a conference, they talk about Regent Park and stuff, and I just sit in the front and I'm curious. Half of the time they do lie about Regent Park, but you were like all of what you said is correct.
I'm glad to get that review.
They do really. When does that happen? Like, and then when they finish the talk, and I go to I give the where do you get that information? So anyway, so you did you highlight a lot of stuff that's correct about Regent Park. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So any questions or thoughts?
Really amazing work. I'm still processing how incredible it is. So you almost had like a two-pronged approach. One was empowering the students, but you were also doing your own ethnographic research, right? What were your own biases when you were creating and observing the students and doing that ethnographic approach? because you talked about how a lot of the other academic studies, they just observe and leave, and you got a fantastic compliment as well that you really stayed true to the identity here. So yeah, where does your role kind of play in all of this?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. So I feel like I have a very difficult role because yes, I'm a researcher, but I'm also the professor of the course. So I have to sort of hustle people along. I have to make sure that they're actually creating those projects. So I feel like sometimes, I mean, that part of it takes precedent in the end. And so just by nature of being sort of the instructor of the course, you know, people are going to act a certain way around me, or they're not going to share certain information with me because of that identity. But I think now, because I've done it so many times, I'm getting to know more and more people, and more residents have taken it, so that is changing as well. And then the other thing is, I mean, I'm very cognizant of the fact that everybody who comes to the course comes with different motivations and also sort of different reasons, right? So the U of T students are taking the course for credit. They really care about their mark. That matters for them. And so to create an equal playing field, one, I have to think about, well, what is the resident experience of taking the course? So Fatum, if you want to chime in, you can, but no pressure. So trying to think of it as, okay, here's an opportunity for a learning experience, but also a place for you to elevate your voice and to share what you know. And then I do fundraising to provide residents with a stipend who take the course as well. And also we have like childcare and food. And so there's just a lot of moving parts to create an environment that makes this work. And then I think, you know, I've been doing this for a few years now, but it's only now that I'm like launching into more formalized research, because it took that amount of time to sort of build those relationships. Yeah, does that answer the question?
I love it. I love the childcare and the stipend, because you're right, you do have to give value back.
Yeah.
For, I mean, these are experts, almost subject matter experts that are coming in.
Exactly, and sharing lived experience and all of that.
Awesome.
And anyone who's taken the course, feel free to chime in at any time.
Is the course year-round, or the semester?
So the course takes place every winter semester. So the next iteration will be winter 2025. So we usually start recruiting for it like end of November, beginning of December. I told you to come sign up and talk to me if you are interested in being interviewed about the basement mosque. But if you're interested in taking the class, please leave me with your name and email, and then in the late fall I'll be in touch. So we usually have an info session, and then we're gonna have like a short application, because now the course is getting more popular and then we only have space for so many people. So short application, just sort of asking why you want to take it, what your interest is, and also your availability.
Is there a cap on how many people at a time take the course?
Yeah, we try to usually keep it to 10 residents. So 10.
And then there's students at the school that take the course as well?
At U of T? Yeah. So that there's always U of T students and there's always residents. So that's the whole sort of beauty of the class, that it's this like fusion of different types of people with different knowledge, yeah.
And what's the title of the course?
The course, so the first iteration was called like Youth Arts and Engagement, but now we've shifted from not working with youth to adults, because that youth program, I mean, I think it exists in a new form, but now we're working with adults, and the adult version is called The Changing Cultures of Regent Park. Any other thoughts or questions?
I can add. So I took this course this last semester, and I really enjoyed it. So I've grown up in Regent Park, but I was also studying like urban studies at school. So I got to kind of mix my like lived experience of living in the neighborhood, but also like those concepts that I've learned at school. And I found it to be a very meaningful kind of course that I took. I feel like when I was in high school, it was really easy to get involved within the community, just with like different programming, pathways, Daniels. But then when I got to university, it kind of became difficult to like mix those things together. And this course really allowed me to get back into that community aspect of learning. So yeah.
Yeah, and Thank you for sharing that. And to add on to that, I think that if you're an urban studies or urban planning student in Canada, you'll definitely study Regent Park. So we have the benefit of being in Toronto, so why not study Regent Park alongside people who know it best, is sort of the philosophy of the class. Did the video or did some of the projects that the young women make, did they resonate with you? Do you feel like they're representations of what you see and feel in the neighborhood?
I didn't settle a little bit because I did help Canadian Muslim Association to doing research on peace, but the people who I work with or the community members, they did feel Islamophobic. There's a lot of them who are wearing niqab and hijabs. Yes, you feel a sense of belonging, having access to the resource, the halal store, all of the stuff, yes, the population, but still they did face, they've been spit on the street, they've been called names, all kind of stuff. They did felt they don't belong here. So, but that, yeah, that's one person, but I didn't settle with me because we do feel Islamophobic in this neighborhood. Yeah, this is what it is, yeah. And also you feel responsible when something happened. Am I responsible for 1.5 billion Muslims? Then when some person did something, you call them out, or you call their church, or the preach out. The way how the bias works, it just, yeah, and yeah, it's a traumatic experience for some people.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Did anyone here use the basement mosques or go to them? No.
She lives,
I live in the same building, like 260 Sumac basement is there.
Oh, okay.
So my kids literally grew up with going
okay.
there for 5 times prayers, my husband and everything.
Oh, we would love to talk to you if you're willing to learn about
something about last week, and they start coming here. The kids are feeling sad.
So when I just pass from there, it just feels so sad. The door is closed. Like usually it's always open and somebody's.
So it's just so. Why? So if the building hasn't been torn down, then why is it closed?
We really don't know what's the reason.
So there's a lot of reasons. A couple of months ago, they were bringing a kind of excuse, the fire measurement, like all of them. Yusuf also he was a part of all of, he witnessed all of the things that they bring in excuse. Just they won't use it. The fire code, like 20-something years, they've been using it, and they say, oh, the fire code. What were you all this time to do this? To just
because they were unofficial spaces, right? Like they were not like authorized. They were people creating their own kind of infrastructures of care because they could, and now that there's all eyes on Regent Park, then these rules or reasons are given. So
no, just they don't want to count them a part of that. They relocate them.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that they were thinking. But at the same time, they need to talk about how crime prevention by using those spaces. A lot of drug activity was happening on that area and that buildings. It was because of that activity that's happening. There is no crime and drug activity was taking place. That also will back them up. But at the same time, if the community there is a need, you need to provide the need that exists.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. That's not the people are coming from another neighborhood. The people who live in the buildings, surrounding buildings. So yeah. So there's a lot of kids who are using that every day. So that's also one of crime prevention. I think if you are on doing it immediately, than when the story is being forgotten. Like when they are going to be doing the study.
This summer.
This summer?
Yeah, now.
Okay.
We're doing it now.
Yeah. The reason that I said, like, it has to be that the emotion is like, I was talking to Shabana and she said the kids are feeling sad.
Yeah.
They are not, there is not far away, come 246.
Yeah.
And still those memory has to be captured. If you have opportunity also documenting on that place.
Yeah, I went once a couple of months ago and I thought there was more time. I didn't realize they were already closed. So yeah, you're right, now is really the time. But I guess I learned that there were 6 before, 6 basement mosques. Is that true?
Yeah, 365 too.
Yeah.
That's gone.
Yeah.
So and that, even though I'm not sure if they allow you to see the basement, Ibrahim, the one he just picked up the baby, he has a document that space. He has a video of footage.
Oh, that would be
so maybe
very
that's a
helpful
person
to
connect with.
That would be very nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is anyone interested in taking the class?
Maybe you could give your contact.
It depends on when it's going to be, because I have another program. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we usually have it in the evening in case. So if people are working, then they can take it. Marianne, you almost took it, but then we lost you
because it's 5:30.
So maybe we need to make it later.
Yeah, 6. I get home at 6.
Maybe we should push it to 6 to have it 6 to 8 rather than 5. 5:30. Yeah.
I finish at 5:30.
Got it.
If there's a flyer, also we could share it in the center.
Yeah, I'll share it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is the program the same?
So you mean the class program?
Yeah.
So aspects of it are the same. So a lot of the readings repeat. We don't require residents to do the readings. We give you access to them, but we know everyone's really busy. But so the readings repeat, and with that, like some of the lectures too. But then it's different in that because there's different residents that take it each year, they each bring different like ideas or expertise and all of that. So the conversations are always different, and the projects are always different. So I've done the class 4 times, same model, and all the projects are radically different. And I think that's just this, in the spirit of creativity that happens, and also because of the focuses, because our focus sort of shifts a little bit, then the projects do that. But we did have, like this year, we had 2 women who took it last year take it again, and they told me they felt like it was very different, even though there was some.
Do residents get UFT credit when they take the course?
No, so unfortunately, we are not able to give credit. They do get a certificate, so it's like a course completion certificate and then a stipend. So we haven't, the university has a lot of rules, so we haven't really figured out how to actually give credit, but certificate and stipend is what residents get.
I know TMU does a similar, and you get credits for courses when you take it, maybe something to explore.
Yeah, something to explore. We have a very tricky administration, so yes.
Yusuf, if you could provide us a little bit more information of the TMU contact, then I can follow.
Yeah, that would be cool. Mishika took it as a TMU student and then was able. It was a little complicated.
The process was a lot. I just sent in my transcript today actually to get the credit approved, but it took a process.
It was a long process but we can keep exploring. And I think going through that process, we sort of alerted some people to the fact that this should be easier. So. Well, I would encourage you to check out the projects, and especially the cookbook. And Marianne actually has a recipe in it, and Fatim has a recipe in it. So if you like cooking, you could access their recipes.
It's in that link.
Yeah, if you click this link or copy this link, it takes you to the course website, and then there's a tab that says projects, and the cookbook is in the projects from 2024. Great. I think we're done, so enjoy the refreshments. And
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And please follow us on our social media platform. For more information, you can check out our website,